let's go on to story number 5. We're going to go to Eric Kalis. Eric, this is a piece that's coming out of the Business Insider. I'm going to read you the headline for a couple graphs, and I want you to comment. And keep in mind, background for this story, or the context is a lot of people are saying that Miami is going to be really, in South Florida, is going to be dealing with a lot of issues with the global sea level rise, because we're effectively below sea level or right on the verge of sea level, depending on how you measure it. So here we go with the headline in the first couple graphs, Eric. Then I want you to comment. Again, Business Insider. Miami shows how a new kind of gentrification is coming to U.S. cities. Business Insider does 3 bullet points before they get into their story. Bullet point number 1, Miami's real estate market is feeling the effects of the climate crisis and a growing population. Point number 2, wealthier residents are moving to higher ground, putting pressure on lower income communities. And point number 3, a general lack of affordable housing is also hurting Miami's growing low income and immigrant communities. And here's the first couple graphs, Eric, then I want you to comment. Miami is one of the hottest real estate markets in the country. A flood of transplants over the last several years has pushed home prices and rents even higher in the South Florida metropolis, making it harder for low-income Floridians to afford the city. But gentrification in Miami is layered with the very real impacts of the climate crisis, which makes living in the city's many low-lying areas and waterfront neighborhoods increasingly perilous, despite the desirable ocean views and proximity to the beach. Some of the city's lower-income communities are farther inland and on higher ground than traditionally ritzier areas. That makes them safer from rising sea levels, but more at risk for so-called climate gentrification as Miami's wealthier residents begin to snap up land and homes in less flood-prone areas. Eric, I'm just wondering, you're in the public relations game right now. You used to write about real estate for a decade. Right now, you're working on behalf of developers, builders, other sites. I'm just wondering, hey, what's your thought about it? Is Miami kind of a reflection of what we're probably going to see around the country, especially in areas where global sea level rise could really have an effect? And then B, how difficult would it be from a public relations and marketing perspective to pitch something that's inland rather than something that's right on the water? I mean, the water kind of sells itself, whether it's the bay, the intercoastal, or it's the Atlantic Ocean, the sand, versus something that's inland in one of these climate regentrification areas. So what say you, Mr. Kalis?
Well, I happen to represent both coastal and inland developments, so I certainly know how to market the pros and cons of both. And just to touch on the Business Insider piece before we get into that, because like a lot of times when these national reporters kind of try to parachute in and talk about what's going on in Miami, the piece is really disjointed. It's kind of all over the place, and it's conflating various trends that, the case of the gentrification it talks about has been going on for quite some time now, in terms of there's been massive, look at Miami World Center. That's 20 years in the making, essentially in Overtown. That area, I was just there for an event at the beginning of March, and I was blown away by the high-end retailers that are at Miami World Center. If you told me in the 2000s that those kind of, Lincoln Road caliber, Design District caliber type retailers would be there, I'd tell you you're crazy. So
now, granted, Mr. Kalis, my office is right next to that. Granted, nobody's in these retailers, but they're all here.
They're all paying the exorbitant rents to be, what was previously Overtown Park West. The Magic City Innovation District has been in various stages of development for many years in Little Haiti. These neighborhoods have been targeted for redevelopment because the coastal neighborhoods and the nearby urban core neighborhoods, they're out of land. This is where the cheaper land that developers could assemble and build these, multi-faceted, long-term, mixed-use, transformative types of developments. That's where the opportunity existed. So this is not, developers being freaked out about sea level rise and shying away from the coast. I promise you, these developers, if they could tie down large-scale development sites on the water, they would be doing it in a second. Especially if this is economically driven and it's long-term. So, I think this national publication was going for a provocative headline and using a phrase that I'm sure is going to become a national cliche, like so many others. Not to be dismissive of the impacts of sea level rise and climate change. I'm certainly not, trying to dismiss that. I'm just trying to give our viewers and listeners an insight into the thought process of these developers and what drives them for these long-term projects. These neighborhoods that are mentioned in the story have been development targets for many, many years and decades in the case of where Miami World Center is. So this has been a long-term process. So going back to your question about how do you market, these projects,
Yes.
and there's certainly an advantage to, with an inland project, kind of leveraging the fact that a project is inland. And with one Coral Gables project that was completed 5 years ago that we worked on, we would actually do write-ups where we determined the exact elevation and looked at the
Interesting.
maps, the exact elevation of the site, and showed that not only was this particular project in an inland location, but it was actually almost twice as elevated as the average in Miami-Dade County. So we were actually using messaging about elevation, explaining how that's a defense against flooding, all the benefits of being in an inland elevated site when it comes to that project. And, it's and then with the coastal luxury developments, you're going after certainly a different market there. And, it's a lifestyle play. You're promoting the lifestyle. That the buyers you're going after are largely not going to be full-time residents. So you're going after the seasonal residents that it's been a life goal of theirs to have a beautiful high-end home or high-end condominium on the beach, or maybe it's, in the downtown core, which certainly is also, on the bay and certainly prone to flooding and impacts, that we're talking about here. So, you're going after different demographics, but you do have to be mindful of the concerns and questions that buyers are going to have about coastal projects. And
No, Eric, if I can interrupt, so I'm thinking about my own experience with some clients, potentially, like, I remember one cardiologist, he wanted to buy a condo in Sunny Isles, and, he was worried about global sea level rise. And then after contemplating, he said, well, what the hell do I care? I'm 50 years old. By the time the seas rise, I'm probably gonna be out of here anyways. So what difference does it make? So just using that as context, I'm wondering, and I'm not talking about any of your clients, but I'm wondering, do you think it can get to the point where, just like you sell the water, you could actually sell this elevation? And this is my thought process. Generally speaking, when you have a great location, you don't have to give a lot of stuff because people come in for the location. But as you go out west, you got to give more stuff to kind of sweeten the pot to get the people move in. Can you see any marketing movement, at least at this point, where maybe the elevation is a selling point rather than the stuff, where you can give less stuff like you do on the coast and you're able to sell it strictly based on elevation? Or is this an out-of-towner parachuting in and telling us what we should be thinking? And unless you're like really hardcore in the global sea level rise, you really don't give a shit.
I think it could be part of the narrative, and it could be an effective part of the narrative. And it doesn't necessarily have to be elevation in inland locations. You can also promote it. Maybe it's a project on a site in a coastal submarket that is at a significantly higher elevation than its neighbors or than the competitive set. So it doesn't have to necessarily be in coastal submarket versus an inland thing. It can be differentiating your project from its counterparts, because the reality is a potential buyer in one of these coastal projects is going to probably be choosing between a couple of different coastal projects. They've already made that choice of where they want to buy and where they want to be. So they may have to get more granular in their marketing or promote what they're doing as developers to mitigate against these impacts as well. And I know the cities, there's been efforts with Miami Beach and parts of Fort Lauderdale to actually elevate public streets and elevate properties. So I know that's part of how these cities are kind of marketing themselves, because they have to do something as well. So the mitigation, what you're doing about it, is just as important as the differentiator and the kind of inherent features of your site and your project.